Hey guys, welcome back. Or if this is your first time here, welcome. Go ahead and get comfortable. Pull that blanket up. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Turn the brightness down on your phone. Let your shoulders drop. Take a breath. Tonight, we're going somewhere vast. Somewhere cold. Somewhere that smells like horse sweat and fermented milk. Tonight, we're going to the Mongolian steppe. And we're going to talk about a man who built the largest contiguous land empire in the history of the human species. No big deal. Just a guy who started with literally nothing. Less than nothing, actually. And ended up ruling everything from Korea to Hungary. His name, the one the world remembers, is Genghis Khan. But he wasn't born with that name. He was born Temüjin. And his childhood, oh, it was rough, like spectacularly, absurdly, almost comically rough. So settle in. Close your eyes if you want. This one's going to take a while. Let's start at the beginning, sometime around 1162. And honestly, nobody is completely sure of the exact year because record keeping on the Mongolian steppe in the 12th century was, shall we say, not a priority. A baby boy was born in a nomadic camp somewhere near the Onon River, in what is now northeastern Mongolia. His father was a tribal chieftain named Yesige. His mother was a woman named Holan who, fun fact, Yesige had basically kidnapped from another man, because that is how courtship worked on the steppe sometimes. You saw a woman you liked, and you just took her. Romantic. Right. Holan had been married to a Merkit tribesman, and Yesige and his brothers ambushed them and rode off with her. Holan reportedly wept. A lot, understandably, so into this loving, totally normal family, little Temüjin was born, according to legend. And this is one of those legends that historians roll their eyes at but still feel obligated to mention. The baby was born clutching a blood clot in his tiny fist. This was interpreted as a sign that he was destined to be a great warrior. No, in reality, babies grab all sorts of things. But sure, clot equals future world conqueror. Let's go with that. Temüjin's early years were probably about as normal as they could be for the son of a minor Mongol chief. He learned to ride horses almost before he could walk. Because that is just what you did. Horses were everything. They were transport. They were warfare. They were status. If you couldn't ride, you were basically useless. He also would have learned to hunt, to shoot a bow, and to survive in a landscape that was beautiful but also absolutely merciless. The Mongolian steppe is a place of extremes. Blistering hot summers, winters that could freeze you solid overnight, wind that never stops, and grass. Just endless grass in every direction. No cities, no permanent buildings. Just sky and grass and horses, and the occasional felt tent called a jur. You might know it as a yurt. No. Yes, gay. Temüjin's dad was chief of the Kiad clan, which was part of the broader Borjigin tribe. He wasn't some great and powerful king. He was more like a mid-level manager of a nomadic group that was constantly jockeying for position against other nomadic groups. The Mongol tribes at this time were not united. They were a fractured, bickering mess of clans and sub-clans, all raiding each an axid, other forming alliances, breaking alliances, stealing each other's livestock and wives, and generally behaving like an enormous, violent, never-ending family reunion. When Temüjin was about 9 years old, again, the dates are fuzzy. Yes, Gay decided it was time to arrange a marriage for his son, so he took Temüjin on a little road trip across the steppe to find him a bride. They ended up at the camp of a tribe called the Conquests, and there Temüjin was betrothed to a girl named Bibodha. She was about 10. He was about 9. It was very sweet, in a deeply transactional political alliance kind of way. The deal was that Temüjin would stay with Bibodha's family for a while, sort of like an internship in being a future son-in-law. But on the way home, alone, Yeske made a fateful mistake. He stopped to eat with a group of Tatars. No, the Tatars were longtime enemies of Yeske's people, and Yeske, apparently not thinking this through, sat down and had a meal with them. They recognized him, and they poisoned his food. Because of course they did. Yes, Gay made it home, but he was in bad shape. He sent for Temüjin. The boy rushed back, but it was too late. Yes, Gay died, and just like that, everything fell apart. See, here is the thing about steppe politics. Loyalty was personal. It was to the leader, not to the leader's family. When Yeske died, most of his followers looked at his widow and his children, the oldest of whom was 9, and thought, yeah, no, we're not following a kid. And they left, they just left, took their herds, their tents, their people, and rode away. Some of them were even encouraged to leave by rival clan leaders, who saw an opportunity to absorb Gay's people into their own groups. So Hoelun, Temüjin's mother, was abandoned on the steppe with her children, and almost no resources, no followers, no herds, no protection. This is the point in the story where most people would just quietly disappear from history, starve, get absorbed into another tribe, become nobody. But Hoelun was apparently made of something indestructible. She kept her family alive through sheer force of will. She foraged, she fished, she gathered wild onions and garlic, and whatever else the steppe offered, which that either breaks you or turns you into something terrifying. And in Temüjin's case, well, you already know which one it was. There is a story from this period that tells you a lot about young Temüjin. He and his half-brother Baghdad apparently got into a dispute over a fish, or maybe it was a bird they had hunted. Sources vary. What doesn't vary is the outcome. Temüjin and his brother Qasar snuck up on Baghdad and killed him with arrows. Temüjin was maybe 12 or 13. When Hoelun found out, she was furious. She reportedly screamed at them about how they had no allies, no friends, no one but each other, and they were killing their own family. It was a valid point. But it also tells us something important about Temüjin. Even as a child, he could not tolerate anyone challenging his authority. He would rather eliminate a rival, even a brother. A recurring theme. Life got even worse for a while. At some point, Temüjin was captured by a rival clan called the Taichi. They put a kang on him, a heavy wooden collar, like a portable stock, and held him prisoner. It was humiliating. He was a captive, a slave, a thing, but he escaped. The details vary, depending on which source you read. In one version, he hid in a river, breathing through a reed. In another, a sympathetic family helped him flee in the night. Either way, he got out, and he came back to his family with a hardened look in his eyes and a very long memory. These early experiences, the abandonment, the poverty, the betrayal, the captivity, shaped Temüjin in ways that would echo across continents for centuries. He learned deeply and permanently. The world was brutal. That loyalty was rare and precious. That betrayal was common and unforgivable. And that the only way to survive was to be stronger, smarter. Around you, he wasn't sitting in some palace being tutored in philosophy. He was eating rats in the dirt and learning that mercy was a luxury he could not afford. So that is where we start, with a parentless, friendless, homeless teenager on the Mongolian steppe. owning nothing but a grudge and an iron will. And from this absolute rock bottom, he is going to build an empire. But not yet. First, he needs friends. He needs allies. He needs to figure out how the game works. And then he needs to break the game entirely and rebuild it in his own image. But we'll get to that. Let's take it slow. There is no rush. We've got all night. All right. So where were we? Right. Temüjin is a teenager. He has got nothing. His dad is dead. His tribe abandoned him. He killed his half-brother over a fish. He escaped captivity. He is living on the edge of survival with his guide, mother and siblings. It is not exactly a promising start for the future ruler of the largest empire the world has ever seen. But here is where things start to shift. Slowly, quietly. Like a glacier that eventually flattens everything in its path. The first smart thing Temüjin did was reconnect with an old friend. His name was Jamaka. They had been blood brothers, Anda, in Mongol tradition. When they were kids, being Anda was a serious thing. It was a bond closer than family, sealed by ritual and mutual devotion. Temüjin and Jamaka had sworn this oath as boys, and now, as young men. Temüjin went back to Jamaka's camp, and the two of them reunited. For a time, they were inseparable. They rode together, camped together, shared everything. It was like a buddy movie set on horseback, in the middle of nowhere. Very wholesome. Very wholesome. Cozy, very doomed. But we'll get to that. Around this same time, Temüjin also went and collected his fiancée, Biporse, remember her? The girl he'd been betrothed to as a child. She'd been waiting. Her family honored the agreement, and Bifubi came to live with Temüjin. She brought with her a fine coat made of sable fur, which might not sound like much, but on the steppe, a good fur coat was basically a briefcase full of cash. Temüjin, ever the strategist, didn't just wear the coat. He used it as a gift. He took that coat to a powerful man named Toghrul, who was the Khan of the Khwarezmian tribe, one of the most powerful groups on the steppe. Toghrul had been an old ally of Temüjin's father. Yes, Jige. Fact, yes. Gay had once helped Toghrul reclaim his throne after he'd been overthrown by his own relatives. Because apparently, getting overthrown by your own relatives was just a thing that happened constantly. It was practically a hobby. So Temüjin showed up at Toghrul's camp, presented the sable coat and said, essentially, my father helped you. No, help me. Temüjin's patron, his protector, his political daddy. This was huge. It gave Temüjin legitimacy. It gave him connections. It gave him a safety net, and he needed one almost immediately because disaster struck again. The Merkits remember them. The tribe that Yesgay had kidnapped Holon from decided it was payback time. They raided Temüjin's camp and kidnapped Burte, because apparently the cycle of bride stealing was generational. Temüjin was devastated and furious. He went to Toghrul and Jamaka and asked for help, and they gave it. Together, they assembled a force and attacked the Merkits, rescuing Burte in the process. No, here is a slightly awkward detail. By the time Burte was rescued, she was pregnant, and nobody was entirely sure who the father was. The child, a boy named Jochi, was born shortly after the same rescue, and for the rest of his life there were whispers about whether he was really Temüjin's son. Temüjin publicly accepted him, but the shadow of doubt followed Jochi forever, and it would cause real political problems later on. But that is a story for another part of the night. Let's keep moving. After the Merkit rescue, Temüjin's reputation started to grow. People on the steppe began to notice him. He was brave, he was decisive, He rewarded loyalty generously and punished betrayal absolutely. And this last part was crucial. On the steppe, most leaders distributed spoils based on social rank. The nobles got the biggest share. The commoners got scraps. Temüjin did something different. He gave rewards based on merit. If you fought well, you got rewarded, regardless of your bloodline. If you were loyal, you were promoted. If you betrayed him, you were dead, simple, clean, revolutionary. This meritocratic approach attracted followers like a magnet. Herders, warriors, outcasts, people from minor clans with no prospects. They all started drifting toward Temüjin's camp. He was building something new. No, just another tribe, something bigger, something based on loyalty to him personally, not on blood ties or tradition. It was a subtle but profound shift in how steppe society worked, and it was happening right under everyone's noses. And this is where the friendship with Jamaka started to curdle, because Jamaka was also ambitious. He was also charismatic and smart. And he was watching Temüjin attract more and more followers. And he didn't love it. The two of them had been equals, brothers, partners, but Temüjin was starting to pull ahead. And Jamaka could feel it. The break came gradually. There is a story, probably embellished, but it captures the vibe, about the two of them riding together one day, and Jamaka making a cryptic remark about where to set up camp. B, who was apparently quite politically savvy, interpreted the remark as a subtle power play and advised Temüjin to separate from Jamaka, and he did. One night, Temüjin's people simply rode away from Jamaka's camp. No fight, no dramatic confrontation. They just left, and a significant number of Jamaka's own followers went with them. They chose Temüjin. That had to sting. Around Fayan, give or take, because again, the dates are squishy, Temüjin was elected Khan by his followers. No. Genghis Khan, no. Yet, just Khan, leader, chief. It was a modest title compared to paid what was coming, but it was a start. He was maybe in his mid-20s. He had a growing band of loyal warriors. He had the backing of Togrul and the Khwarezmians, and he had a very clear understanding of how to play the political game on the steppe. Jamaka, meanwhile, was not about to just let this happen. He gathered his own coalition and challenged Temüjin. The two former blood brothers met in battle at a place called Dalan Balshut. Temüjin lost. Yep, he lost. The great conqueror got beaten. It happens. Jamaka won the battle, and according to some sources, he celebrated his victory by boiling 70 captives alive in 70 cauldrons, which is, well, it is certainly a choice. No, exactly. A great way to win hearts and minds. In fact, Jamaka's cruelty apparently drove even more people to defect to Temüjin, who at least had the decency to execute his enemies quickly, rather than turning them into soup. So Temüjin licked his wounds. He regrouped. He waited. He was patient in a way that most steppe leaders were not. Most of them wanted immediate glory, immediate conquest. Temüjin was willing to play the long game. He spent years building alliances, absorbing smaller clans, rewarding loyalty, punishing disloyalty. Slowly, steadily, he grew stronger. The next decade or so is a blur of steppe politics. Alliances formed, alliances broken, small wars, bigger wars, betrayals, reconciliations, more betrayals. It is like a soap opera where everyone is on horseback and the weapons are real. Temüjin fought against the Tartars, the very people who had poisoned his father, and he destroyed them. Utterly. He ordered the execution of every Tatar male taller than the linchpin of a cart wheel, which meant every male above roughly 3 feet tall. The women and children were absorbed into his own people. It was thorough, it was brutal, and it sent a very clear message. If you cross Temüjin, you stop existing. He also eventually turned on his patron, Togrul. This one was complicated. Their relationship had been souring for years, partly because Togrul's son, a man named Sengum, was jealous of Temüjin's growing power and kept whispering poison in his father's ear. There were negotiations, failed marriage, alliances, misunderstandings, and eventually open war. Temüjin defeated the Khwarezmians in Fintin. Togrul fled and was killed by Naimans who didn't recognize him. Sengum fled to the western borderlands and eventually disappeared from history. And just like that, one of the most powerful tribes on the steppe was gone, absorbed, digested into Temüjin's growing machine. Jamaka was next. Poor Jamaka. He had been Temüjin's best friend, his blood brother, his rival, his nemesis. By this point, Jamaka was running out of allies. He'd been bouncing from coalition, trying to build a force strong enough to stop Temüjin, but it never quite worked. People kept choosing Temüjin over him. In the end, Jamaka's own followers betrayed him and delivered him to Temüjin in chains. And here is where the story gets weirdly sad. Temüjin reportedly had the men who betrayed Jamaka executed, because even though Jamaka was his enemy, the act of betraying one's own leader was something Temüjin found unforgivable. He valued loyalty above all else, even when it was loyalty to someone fighting against him. Then he offered Jamaka a chance to reconcile, to be brothers again. Jamaka refused. He said there could only be one sun in the sky, and he asked for a noble death, one that didn't spill blood. Temüjin granted it. Jamaka was executed by having his back broken. No blood on the ground. A clean death by steppe standards. It was a strange mercy. The end of a lifelong friendship that had become a lifelong rivalry. And with Jamaka gone, there was nobody left to challenge Temüjin. The steppe was his, all of it. Every tribe, every clan, every family. For the first time in anyone's memory, the Mongol tribes were united under one leader. And in 1206, at a great gathering called Achimenten Kurultai on the banks of the Onon River, the same river near where Temüjin had been born, he was proclaimed ruler of all the Mongols. And he was given a new name, a name that would echo through centuries, a name that would make the walls of cities tremble. Genghis Khan, universal ruler. He was about 44 years old, and he was just getting started. But that is enough for now. Let your eyes rest. We'll pick up the story in a moment, when the man formerly known as Temüjin turns his attention outward, beyond the steppe, toward the wealthy, comfortable, unsuspecting civilizations that surround him. It is going to get very, very interesting, in a calm, sleepy sort of way, of course. So, Genghis Khan, universal ruler, it is a big title, the kind of title that would make most people sit back, enjoy their yak butter tea, and maybe take a long vacation. But Genghis Khan was not most people. He had spent his entire life clawing his way up from nothing. And now that he had everything, at least everything on the Mongolian steppe, he looked around and thought, this is a good start. Which, if you are one of the neighboring civilizations, is a very concerning thought for someone to have. But before we get to the conquering, we need to talk about what Genghis Khan actually built. Because the Mongol Empire wasn't just a bunch of guys on horses riding around and being scary. I mean, it's a talk about what was that too. But it was also a surprisingly sophisticated political and military system, and understanding it is key to understanding how a relatively small group of nomads managed to conquer, roughly, a quarter of the world's land surface. First, let's talk about the army. Genghis Khan reorganized the entire Mongol military along decimal lines. The basic unit was the arban, a group of 10 soldiers. 10 arbans made a zun, which was 100. 10 zuns made a mingan, which was 1,000. And 10 mingans made a tumen, which was 10,000. This might sound simple, and it was. That was the point. It was clean, efficient, and scalable, and critically, these units were not organized by tribe or clan. They were mixed. Genghis Khan deliberately broke up the old tribal structures and shuffled people together. If you were a Tatar serving in an arban with Kerates and Merkits and Naimans, you weren't a Tatar anymore. You were a Mongol. Your loyalty was to your unit, to your commander, and ultimately to Genghis Khan himself. It was a social engineering project disguised as a military restructuring, and it was genius. The soldiers in these units were bound by a rule of collective responsibility. If one man in your arban deserted, the other 9 were punished. If one man in your arban showed cowardice, all might be executed. This sounds harsh, and it was, but it created an incredibly tight bond between soldiers. You watched out for your guys because if they screwed up, it turned the Mongol army into a machine where every part was accountable to every other part. And then there were the horses. Oh, the horses. Every Mongol soldier had at least 3 or 4 horses, sometimes more. They rotated between them, so the animals stayed fresh. This meant a Mongol army could cover distances that seemed physically impossible to their enemies, 60, 70, 80 miles in a day. They ate on horseback. They slept on horseback. If a horse died, they drank its blood for sustenance and kept going. They carried dried meat and fermented mare's milk, airag, and could survive for days without stopping for supplies. They were the fastest the world had ever seen, and nobody knew how to deal with them. The Mongol bow was also a masterpiece. It was a composite recurve bow, relatively short, designed to be fired from horseback, but with a draw weight and power that exceeded most of the infantry bows used by their enemies. A skilled Mongol archer could fire accurately while riding at full gallop, which, if you've ever tried to do anything while riding a horse at full gallop, is basically a superpower. They trained from childhood. By the time they were adults, they were shooting machines, literal human weapon systems on horseback. But it wasn't just brute force. The Mongols were also masters of tactics. They had a whole repertoire of battlefield maneuvers that they practiced endlessly. The most famous was the feigned retreat. They would engage an enemy, then turn and run. The enemy, thinking they had won, would chase them, and the Mongols would lead them on for miles, stretching out their formation, tiring their horses, breaking their discipline. And then, when the enemy was strung out and exhausted, the Mongols would wheel around and destroy them. It worked over and over and over and over again. You would think people would stop falling for it. They did not, because in the heat of battle, the instinct to chase a fleeing enemy is almost irresistible, and the Mongols knew that. They also used psychological warfare with terrifying effectiveness. Before attacking a city, they would send messengers offering terms of surrender. If you surrendered, you were treated relatively well. You paid tribute, you obeyed, but you lived. If you resisted, the Mongols would destroy you completely. They would kill every man, woman, child, and dog in the city. They would level the city, buildings. They would divert rivers to wash away the ruins. And then they would make sure everyone in the region knew about it. Word traveled fast. The next city down the road, usually, surrendered. This wasn't mindless cruelty. It was calculated. Every massacre was an investment in future conquests. The more terrifying the Mongols' reputation became, the less actual fighting they had to do. Cities surrendered out of pure fear. Armies dissolved before battle. It was, in a very grim way, efficient. Why fight 100 battles when you can fight 10 and scare the other 90 into violent submission? No, beyond the military stuff, Genghis Khan also established something called the Yasa, a legal code. The exact contents of the Yasa are debated by historians because no complete copy has survived, but we know the broad strokes. It covered everything from military discipline to property rights to religious freedom. Yes, religious freedom. The Mongols themselves were shamanistic, believing in a sky god called Tengri. But Genghis Khan was remarkably tolerant of other religions. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Taoists. They were all welcome in the Mongol Empire, as long as they behaved and paid their taxes. This was unusual for the era, to put it mildly. In 13th century Europe, people were being burned alive for reading the Bible in the wrong language. And here was Genghis Khan, basically saying, worship whatever you want. I don't care, just don't cause problems. He also established a postal system. It was called the Yam, and it was a network of relay stations spread across the empire. Riders could cover enormous distances by switching to fresh horses. Station. Messages could travel from one end of the empire to the other in days rather than months. It was like a medieval internet, if the internet were made of horses and leather pouches. This communication network was vital to holding the empire together. Information flowed, orders flowed, intelligence flowed. Without the Yam, the Mongol Empire would have been too big to manage. With it, a command from Genghis Khan could reach his generals thousands of miles away in a shockingly short time. He valued skilled people. When the Mongols conquered a city, they would sort the population. Soldiers were killed or conscripted. Ordinary people were often killed or enslaved. But skilled people, engineers, doctors, scribes, craftsmen, translators, were spared and put to work. The Mongols absorbed talent like a sponge. They were nomads who had never built a siege engine in their lives. Within a generation, they were using captured Chinese and Persian engineers to build catapults and battering rams that could crack open the most heavily fortified cities in the world. They didn't need to know how to do everything themselves. They just needed to know how to find the people who did. And that, right there, is maybe the most underrated aspect of the Mongol Empire. They were adapters. They had no ego about borrowing ideas. They took what worked from every civilization they encountered and added it to their toolkit. Chinese siege warfare, Persian administration, Uyghur script, Turkish cavalry tactics. They were like the world's most aggressive startup, acquiring every competitor and integrating their best features. So that is the machine. That is what Genghis Khan built. A meritocratic military organized into disciplined decimal units. Lightning-fast cavalry with devastating archery. Psychological warfare that made resistance seem pointless. A legal code that brought order. A communication network that made governance possible. And an insatiable appetite for useful knowledge and skilled people. It was, quite possibly, the most effective war machine the pre-modern world ever produced. And now, with this machine built and humming, Genghis Khan turned his eyes south, toward China, toward the great kingdoms and empires that sat behind their walls and their rivers and their mountains, comfortable and wealthy and absolutely unprepared for what was coming. Let's drift that way now, shall we? Gently, like a Mongol scout on a quiet night, moving through the grass without a sound. All right. So it is 1206. Genghis Khan has united the steppe. He has built his army. He has got his legal code and his postal system. and his tens of thousands of disciplined, horse-mounted archers who eat simplies, dried meat, and drink mare's milk and can ride all day without breaking a sweat. And now he is looking south toward the big prize, China. But here is the thing. In 1206, China wasn't really a single thing. It was divided. The northern part was ruled by the Jin dynasty, which was founded by a people called the Jurchen. The Jurchen were originally from Manchuria, and they had conquered northern China about a century earlier. They had a big, wealthy empire with major cities, a large population, and a powerful army. Jin was the Song dynasty, which was ethnically Han Chinese and controlled the rich, fertile lands of southern China. And to the west, in what is now northwestern China, there was a smaller kingdom called Xisha, ruled by a people called the Tanguts. Genghis Khan started with the Tanguts. Xisha was the weakest of the three, and it sat right along the Silk Road trade routes, which meant it was both strategically important and full of money. Mongols invaded Xisha, starting around 1207, and it took a few campaigns. Didn't have much choice. Genghis Khan filed them away as dealt with, and turned his attention to the main event, the Jin dynasty. No, the Jin and the Mongols had a complicated history. The Jin had long meddled in Mongol steppe politics, playing tribes against each other, supporting one Khan and undermining another. Treated the Mongols as barbarian vassals, useful for guarding the border, but not worth respecting. There is a famous story, probably apocryphal, but it captures the dynamic perfectly, about a new Jin emperor ascending the throne and demanding that Genghis Khan prostrate himself in submission. Genghis Khan reportedly spat on the ground and said something to the effect of, "I thought this emperor of the Jin was supposed to be someone impressive. This guy." And then he rode north, which in diplomatic terms was basically a declaration of war delivered by horse. The Mongol invasion of Jin China began in earnest around 1211, and it was an absolute disaster for the Jin. The Mongol cavalry swept across the northern Chinese plains like a wildfire. The Jin had a wildfire, much larger army, perhaps 500,000 soldiers, but they were infantry, heavy, garrison-based, and tied to their cities and fortifications. The Mongols were none of those things. They moved fast, struck hard, and vanished before the Jin could organize a response. But the cities were a problem. The Jin had massively fortified cities with thick walls, deep moats, and large garrisons. The Mongols, at this stage, had no siege technology to speak of. They could ride circles around a city, but they couldn't crack it open. So they adapted. They began using captured Chinese engineers and soldiers to build siege weapons. They also employed a tactic that was grimly effective. They would devastate the countryside around a city, driving refugees toward the walls. The city would be forced to take in thousands of extra mouths to feed, straining its stained supplies. Then, the Mongols would settle in for a siege, sometimes forcing the captured refugees to march ahead of their assault forces as human shields. It was absolutely horrifying, and it worked. The campaign against the Jin lasted for years. It wasn't a quick conquest. It was a grinding, brutal series of invasions, sieges, retreats, and counter-invasions. The Mongols would raid deep into Jin territory, loot, and burn everything, then withdraw to the steppe. The Jin would try to recover. Then the Mongols would come back and do it again. It was like being slowly eaten alive. In 1214, the Jin emperor sued for peace. He offered tribute, gold, silk, horses, and a princess. Genghis Khan accepted. Then the Jin emperor made what turned out to be a catastrophic mistake. Moved his capital south from Zhongdu, modern Beijing, to Kaifeng, deeper into his territory. Genghis Khan interpreted this move as a sign that the Jin emperor was preparing to renew the fight from a safer position. He was probably right, and so the Mongols attacked again. In 1215, Zhongdu fell. The city was looted and burned. According to some accounts, the fires burned for a month. A Persian ambassador who visited the ruins later reported seeing mountains of bones and the ground still greasy with human fat. It is one of those details that makes you set down your snack and stare at the stair wall for a moment. But Genghis Khan didn't finish off the Jin. No, yet. He left a general in charge of continuing the campaign in northern China and turned his attention westward. West, that demanded his personal attention, something that would lead to one of the most devastating military campaigns in human history. But we'll get to that in a moment. First, let's talk about what was happening inside the Mongol Empire during all of this. Because it wasn't just war, Genghis Khan was also governing. He was creating institutions. He appointed a man named Shigi Kutu, one of his adopted brothers, as a kind of chief judge responsible for administering the Yasa and keeping records. He adopted the Uyghur script as the written language of the written language Mongol Empire. Because the Mongols didn't have their own writing system, he established trade routes and encouraged commerce. He exempted certain professions from taxes and military service. Doctors, teachers, religious leaders. The empire was becoming a real thing. No, just a horde. No, just an army. A civilization, a rough, violent, still figuring things out civilization, but a civilization nonetheless. And Genghis Khan was at the center of it, making decisions, giving orders, delegating authority to trusted generals and administrators. He was a micromanager when he needed to be and a delegator when he didn't, chose his subordinates well, and he gave them enough freedom to do their jobs while maintaining enough control to keep them in line. It was a difficult balance, and he managed it better than almost any leader of his era. He also had a complex personal life. He had multiple wives. Betrayal wives was the primary one, the empress, the mother of his 4 recognized sons, Jochi, Chagatai, Fijedi, and Tului. But he also had several other wives and many concubines. The Mongol custom was that a Khan could take women from conquered peoples, and Genghis Khan did this enthusiastically. He is reported to have said something along the lines of, "The greatest pleasure in life is to defeat your enemies, to chase them before you, to rob them of their wealth, to see those dear to them bathed in tears, to ride their horses, and to hold their wives and daughters in your arms," which is certainly a mission statement. Genetic studies in the modern era have suggested that something like 1 in every 200 men alive today carries a Y chromosome lineage that traces back to Genghis Khan or his close male relatives. That is roughly 16 million men. 16 million, the man was prolific, but his 4 main sons, the ones who would eventually divide the empire, were already causing headaches. Jochi, the eldest, was dogged by the rumor that he wasn't really Genghis Khan's biologically son. Chagatai, the second son, was aggressive, hot-tempered, and never let Jochi forget the rumors about his paternity. The two of them clashed constantly. The third son was more easygoing, a diplomat, a drinker, and Tului, the youngest, was a skilled military commander who inherited his father's talent for warfare, but also had a fondness for alcohol that would eventually kill him. These 4 sons, and the tension between them, would eventually tear the empire apart. But that is a problem for later. For now, let's keep our eyes on Genghis Khan himself, because he is about to turn west. And what happens next is going to make the Jin campaign look like a warm-up exercise. Let's float gently in that direction now. westward. Eyes. Breathe, we're getting there. Okay, let's talk about the Khwarezmian Empire. And let's talk about Sultan Muhammad. A man whose name should be synonymous with catastrophic miscalculation. Because what this man did, or rather, what he allowed to happen, triggered a response so overwhelming, so devastating, that it fundamentally altered the demographics and political landscape of Central Asia and the Middle East, centuries. And it all started because he couldn't just be cool about a trade caravan. So, the Khwarezmian Empire, around the year 1218, it was one of the largest and most powerful Muslim empires in the world. It controlled a vast territory stretching from modern-day Iran, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and into parts of Pakistan and Iraq. Its capital was the ancient city of Samarkand. Its Sultan, Muhammad II, styled himself as a mighty conqueror and defender of Islam. He had a large army. He had wealthy cities. He had confidence. So much confidence. An almost tragic amount of confidence. Genghis Khan, meanwhile, was busy consolidating his position in China and Central Asia. He had recently conquered the Khwarezmian Empire, a Buddhist kingdom in what is now Kyrgyzstan and Western China, which brought the Mongol Empire right up to the border of the Khwarezmian Empire. And Genghis Khan, at this point, didn't actually want war with Khwarezm. He wanted trade. The Silk Road ran through Khwarezmian territory, and Genghis Khan wanted access to those lucrative trade networks. So he sent a diplomatic mission to Sultan Muhammad, proposing a trade agreement. Let's be friends. Let's do friends business. Let's make money. Muhammad agreed, at least nominally. And Genghis Khan sent a caravan of several hundred merchants, some sources say 450, loaded with goods to trade in Khwarezmian territory. They arrived at the border city of Otrar, and the governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, who was, by some accounts, a relative of Muhammad's mother, looked at this caravan full of wealth and decided to accuse the merchants of being spies. He seized all their goods, and then he killed them, all of them, or nearly all of them. A few may have escaped. When Genghis Khan heard about this, he did something remarkably restrained. He sent ambassadors to Sultan Muhammad, demanding that the governor of Otrar be handed over for punishment. A reasonable request. A diplomatic solution. Muhammad's response was to execute the lead ambassador and send the others back with their beards shaved off, which was a profound insult in Mongol culture. It was basically Muhammad saying, I don't respect you, I am not afraid of you, what are you going to do about it? What Genghis Khan was going to do about it was destroy the Khwarezmian Empire, so thoroughly that it would cease to exist as a political entity, and the lands it occupied would take centuries to recover. But Muhammad didn't know that yet. He was about to find out. In 1219, Genghis Khan assembled one of the largest Mongol armies ever fielded. Estimates range from 100,000 to 200,000 soldiers, and marched west. He brought his best generals Jebe, Subutai, sons Joshi, Chagatai, Jadi, and Tolui. This was not a raid. This was not a border skirmish. This was a full-scale invasion designed to erase a civilization from the map. The campaign was a masterclass in military strategy. Genghis Khan divided his forces into multiple columns that struck simultaneously at different points across the Khwarezmian frontier. This completely confused Sultan Muhammad, who couldn't figure out where the main attack was coming from. Because the answer was everywhere. The Mongols were everywhere. Muhammad had made another critical error before the invasion even started. Instead of concentrating his forces for a decisive battle, which might have worked given his numerical advantage, spread them out across his cities as garrisons. His reasoning was that the fortified cities could hold out against the Mongol cavalry, which had no siege capability, Except, as we discussed, Mongols had been learning siege warfare from Chinese engineers for the past decade. They very much had siege capability now, and Muhammad's scattered garrisons were about to discover this. Way, the city of Otrar was first fitting, since that is where the whole mess started. The Mongols besieged it for 5 months. When it fell, the governor Inalchuk was captured. According to legend, Genghis Khan had molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a poetic punishment for the man whose greed had started a war. The story might be embellished, but then again, Genghis Khan was known for creative punishments. Then came Bukhara, one of the great cities of the Islamic world, a center of learning, culture, and religion. The Mongols arrived in February 1220. The garrison attempted a breakout and was annihilated. The city surrendered. Genghis Khan reportedly rode into the main mosque, was told it was the house of God, and said, "If so, God will not mind if I use it as a stable," or words to that effect. The city was looted. The citizens were driven out. Many were killed. The city was burned. Libraries that had taken centuries to build were destroyed in hours. Samarkand fell next, the jewel of Central Asia, Muhammad's capital. It had a garrison of perhaps 100,000 soldiers. It lasted about 5 days. The defenders were overwhelmed by Mongol siege tactics and the sheer ferocity of the assault. The skilled craftsmen and artisans were separated out and sent back to Mongolia. Much of the rest of the population was slaughtered. And Muhammad ran. He literally ran away. He abandoned his cities, his army, his people, and fled westward with a small group of followers. Genghis Khan sent 2 of his best generals, Jabe and Subutai, with 20,000 cavalry to chase him. Their orders were simple: find Muhammad and kill him. The chase covered thousands of miles, through Iran, across the Caucasus, and into the lands of modern-day Azerbaijan and Georgia. It was one of the longest cavalry pursuits in military history. Muhammad fled from city to city, never staying in one place long enough for the Mongols to catch him. Eventually ended up on a small island in the Caspian Sea, where he died of pneumonia, or exhaustion, or sheer despair. Probably all 3. The mightiest sultan in the Muslim world, dying alone on a tiny island, wrapped in rags. It would be pitiful if he hadn't brought the whole thing on himself. Meanwhile, Jebe and Subutai, having lost their quarry, did what any good Mongol generals would do with 20,000 cavalry and nothing specific to do. They kept going. They rode through Azerbaijan, defeated a Georgian army, crossed the Caucasus Mountains in winter, which was supposed to be impossible, and emerged onto the plains of southern Russia. There they encountered a combined army of Russian princes and Kipchak Turks at the Battle of the Khalkha River in 1223. The Mongols won decisively. The Russian princes were captured and, in classic Mongol fashion, killed in a way that didn't spill blood. They were placed under a wooden platform, and the Mongol generals sat on the platform and ate dinner while the princes were slowly crushed to death beneath them. Then Jebe and Subutai rode all the way back to Mongolia, completing a journey of roughly 5,500 miles. It was essentially a reconnaissance in force across half of Eurasia, and it gave the Mongols invaluable intelligence about the lands and peoples to their west. Intelligence they would use later. Back in Khwarezm, the destruction continued. Genghis Khan's son Temüjin was given the task of conquering the eastern provinces of the empire, particularly the region of Khorasan in modern-day Iran, Afghanistan. Temüjin was efficient. The city of Merv, one of the largest cities in the world at the time, with a population of perhaps 500,000, was besieged and conquered. According to Persian historians, the Mongols killed virtually the entire population. The numbers given in the sources are almost unbelievable. 700,000 dead, 1 million dead. The figures are probably exaggerated, but even a fraction of those numbers represents one of the worst massacres in human history. The city of Nishapur suffered a similar fate. Balkh, Herat, one after another, the great cities of Central Asia, Iran, were reduced to ruins. The total death toll from the Mongol invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire is impossible to calculate precisely, but modern estimates suggest that the population of the region may have declined by 75% or more. Some areas took centuries to recover, some never did. The irrigation systems that had sustained agriculture in Central Asia for thousands of years were deliberately destroyed by the Mongols, turning fertile farmland into desert. It was destruction on a scale that the world had never seen before, and all because a greedy governor decided to rob a trade caravan, and a proud sultan decided he didn't need to apologize for it. The lesson, I suppose, is that when someone sends you a polite letter asking for a peaceful trade agreement, maybe don't kill their merchants and insult their ambassadors. Just a thought. Let your mind go soft for a moment. Let the horror of it settle into something distant, something historical, something that happened a long time ago to people who are long gone. Breathe. To keep going, but gently, always gently. So, by around 1222 or 1223, the Khwarezmian Empire was gone. No, weakened. No, conquered. Gone. Erased. Genghis Khan had made his point. The Mongol Empire now stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, Caspian Sea, and the name of Genghis Khan was spoken with fear across most of the known world. He was in his 60s now. He had been fighting, conquering, and governing for most of his life. Might think that he would have been satisfied, that he would have ridden home, sat by a fire, and spent his remaining years enjoying the impossible scope of what he had built. But Genghis Khan was not a man who sat by fires and enjoyed things. He had unfinished business. Remember the Tanguts, the Shisha kingdom, the ones who had surrendered early on and agreed to provide tribute and military support. Well, when Genghis Khan had called for troops during the Khwarezmian campaign, the Tanguts had dragged their feet. They hadn't provided the soldiers they had promised. Their king had even reportedly sent a sarcastic message, suggesting that if Genghis Khan didn't have enough soldiers, maybe he shouldn't be going to war. This was a mistake. An enormous, fatal mistake. Because if there was one thing that Genghis Khan absolutely would not tolerate, it was disloyalty. He had built his entire empire on the principle that loyalty was rewarded and betrayal was punished. The Tanguts had betrayed him, and now he was going to destroy them. In 1226, Genghis Khan launched his final campaign against Shisha. He was in his mid-60s, which was ancient by the standards of the era. His health was declining. There are various stories about what was wrong with him. Some sources say he fell from his horse during a hunting trip and suffered internal injuries. Others suggest illness. But whatever was ailing him, he refused to stop. He pressed on with the campaign, directing his armies from a litter or a cart when he could no longer ride. The campaign against Shisha was brutally thorough. The Mongols systematically destroyed Tangut cities, killed their soldiers, and devastated their countryside. It was punishment warfare, pure and Dushan, simple. Genghis Khan wanted the Tanguts to cease to exist as a people, and he very nearly achieved it. The Tangut culture, language, and identity were so thoroughly obliterated that for centuries, historians knew almost nothing about them. It is only through modern archaeology that we've been able to reconstruct fragments of their civilization. And then, in August 1227, while the campaign was still ongoing, Genghis Khan died. The exact cause of death is one of history's enduring mysteries. The sources disagree. Some say it was the injuries from the horsefall. Some say it was an illness, possibly typhus, or some other disease contracted during the campaign. There are more exotic theories. One suggests he was killed by a captured Tangut princess, who stabbed him or used some hidden weapon on their wedding night. Another claims he was struck by lightning. The truth is, we don't know. We'll probably never know. What we do know is that one of the most consequential human beings who ever lived died in a felt tent somewhere in northwestern China. In the late summer of 1227, he was probably 65 or 66 years old. His death was kept secret for a time. The Mongol commanders needed to finish the Xisha campaign and ensure a smooth succession, and they couldn't afford the chaos that the news of Genghis Khan's death would cause. According to legend, everyone who encountered the funeral procession on its way back to Mongolia was killed to maintain the secrecy. The Tangut capital was taken, and the royal family was executed. Xisha was erased, the last wish of a dying conqueror carried out to the letter. Genghis Khan was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in Mongolia. His followers did not want his tomb to be found or disturbed. According to various legends, they diverted a river over the burial site or had horses trample the ground until no trace of the grave remained, or killed all the workers, and then killed the soldiers who killed the workers. Whatever they did, it worked. The grave of Genghis Khan has never been found. Despite numerous expeditions and searches over the centuries, using everything from ground-penetrating radar to satellite imagery, nobody has been able to locate it. He is somewhere out there, under the steppe, under the grass and the sky, keeping his final secret. Let's take a moment to appreciate what this man accomplished. Born with nothing, orphaned, abandoned, enslaved. And from that absolute 0 point, he created an empire that eventually encompassed roughly 12 million square miles. About 22% of the Earth's total land area. It stretched from Korea to Poland, from Siberia to Vietnam. Under his rule and the rule of his successors, the Mongol Empire connected East and West in ways that had never been done before, facilitating trade, cultural exchange, and the movement of ideas across an entire continent. The Silk Road, which had existed for centuries, became truly viable and safe under Mongol protection. A merchant could travel from Beijing to Baghdad without being robbed. That had never been possible before, but the cost was staggering. Historians estimate that the Mongol conquests killed between 30 and 40 million people, and some estimates go higher, in an era when the world's total population was perhaps 400 million. That means the Mongols may have killed roughly 10% of all the people on Earth. Some scholars have suggested that the Mongol conquests caused such a massive decline in human population that it actually led to reforestation on a scale large enough to affect the global climate, a decrease in atmospheric carbon dioxide caused by the regrowth of forests on depopulating farmland. It is a disturbing thought that one man's ambition could literally change the composition of the Earth's atmosphere. And yet, for all the destruction, Genghis Khan also built something enduring. He established the foundations of an empire that would last, in various forms, for over a century after his death. It created institutions, laws, and traditions that outlived him. He demonstrated that a small, mobile, disciplined force could defeat larger. He permanently connected the peoples of Eurasia in a way that would eventually lead to the globalized world we live in today. The Mongol Empire was, in many ways, the first truly global force. No, because it controlled the whole globe, but because it made the globe smaller. It made the world aware of itself as a whole, interconnected thing. But that is the big picture. Let's zoom in now. Let's talk about what happened after Genghis Khan died. Because his death, as you might expect, did not lead to a smooth, peaceful transition of power. It led to exactly what you'd expect from a family of hard drinking, hard riding, intensely ambitious Mongol princes. It led to a mess. Genghis Khan, for all his strategic genius, had a succession problem. Actually, he had 4 succession problems, and they were named Jochi, Chagatai, and Tolui. No, Genghis Khan had thought about this. He wasn't naive. He knew his sons didn't all get along, particularly Jochi and Chagatai, who hated each other with the kind of intensity that can only be produced by siblings who've been insulting each other since childhood. Chagatai never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that Jochi might not be Genghis Khan's real son, and Jochi never missed an opportunity to want to punch Chagatai in the face for it. So before his death, Genghis Khan had designated his 3rd son, Simdi-Day, as his successor. Shidia was the compromise candidate. He wasn't the most brilliant. He wasn't the most ambitious. He wasn't the best general, but he was likable. He was diplomatic. He could hold his liquor, which, in Mongol culture, was practically a job qualification. And most importantly, both Jochi and Chagatai could tolerate him, which was more than they could say about each other, to keep everyone happy, or at least not actively trying to kill each other. Genghis Khan divided the empire among his sons. This wasn't really a division of the empire into separate nations. It was more like assigning regions of responsibility. Jochi got the western territories, the lands around the Aral Sea, the Kipchak steppe, and anything further west that the Mongols might conquer in the future. Chagatai got Central Asia, the old Khwarezmian lands, the Silk Road cities. Shidia got the lands east of Central Asia, including parts of western China and the Mongol heartland. And Tolui, the youngest, got the Mongol homeland itself, Mongolia proper. According to Mongol custom, the youngest son inherited the family's original territory, called the hearthland. Plus, Tolui got the bulk of the army, which was not nothing. But here is the thing. Jochi didn't even live to see this arrangement play out. He died in 1227, possibly before Genghis Khan himself. The circumstances of his death are murky. Some sources suggest his death was ill. Others hint that Genghis Khan may have had him killed because Jochi was becoming too independent and was rumored to be planning to break away from the empire. We don't know. What we do know is that Jochi's lands passed to his son, Batu, who would eventually found the Golden Horde and conquer Russia. But that is a story for later. Tedai formally became Great Khan at a Kurultai in 1229. And to his credit, he did a pretty good job. He was a builder. He established the Mongol capital at Karakorum, a city in central Mongolia that became the administrative center of the empire. It wasn't exactly a glittering metropolis. The Franciscan friar William of Rubruck, who visited Karakorum in the 1250s, noted that the entire city was smaller than the suburb of Saint-Denis in Paris. But it was a city which was something entirely new for the Mongols. It had palaces, temples, markets, and a famous silver tree, an elaborate fountain that dispensed various alcoholic beverages from its branches, because of course it did. Under Shididi, the Mongol conquests continued. The Jin dynasty in northern China, which had been under pressure for years, was finally finished off in 1234. The Mongols, allied with the Song dynasty of southern China, destroyed the last Jin holdouts. This was a massive victory. The entire northern half of China was now under Mongol control. In the west, Temüjin approved a massive campaign to conquer Europe. This campaign was led by Batu Khan, Jochi's son, with the brilliant General Subutai as his military mastermind. In 1237, the Mongol 37 army, perhaps 150,000 strong, crashed into Russia. The Russian principalities fell like dominoes. Ryazan was first, then Vladimir, then Moscow, which at this time was just a minor town. Kiev, mother of Russian cities, was sacked in 1240. The Mongols then split into two columns and invaded Poland and Hungary simultaneously. In April 1241, the Mongols fought two battles on 2 consecutive days that demonstrated their terrifying tactical superiority. At the Battle of Legnica in Poland, they annihilated a combined Polish-German army. At the Battle of Mohi in Hungary, they destroyed the Hungarian army so completely that the kingdom was essentially depopulated. King Bulai Vir of Hungary fled. Europe was wide open. The Mongols were at the gates of Vienna. There was nothing between them and the Atlantic Ocean, and then they stopped. They turned around and went home. In December 1241, Khwarezmian Khan died, probably of alcoholism, because Simgadi was a phenomenal drinker, even by Mongol standards, and his health had been declining for years when the news reached Batu and Subutai in Europe. The campaign was called off. According to Mongol tradition, all the princes and generals needed to return to Mongolia for the election of a new great Khan. So the army that had been about to conquer Europe simply left, rode away, went home. Europe was saved not by its armies, not by its fortifications, faith, but by a Mongol drinking problem. History is strange. The succession after Temüjin was messy. His wife Temüjin served as regent for several years, maneuvering to get her son Gwainte elected as the next great Khan. Gwainte was elected in 1246, but he was sickly, bad-tempered, and politically incompetent. He died in 1248, possibly poisoned, after a reign of less than 2 years. Then came a power struggle that ended with the election of Genghis Khan in 1251. He was a son of Tolui, Genghis Khan's youngest son. This was significant because it shifted the center of power from Sindudai's line to Tolui's line, and it created resentments that never really went away. Menge was competent. He launched new campaigns of conquest. He sent his brother Hulagu west to deal with the Islamic world. Hulagu would eventually sack Baghdad in 1258, killing the last Abbasid caliph, which was one of the most traumatic events in Islamic history. He sent another brother, Kublai, to conquer the Song dynasty in southern China. The empire was still expanding, still conquering, still terrifying everyone in its path. But Menge died in 1259 during the campaign against the Song dynasty, and his death triggered the crisis that would permanently fracture the Mongol Empire. Because 2 of his brothers, Kublai, Arik Bipadek, both claimed the title of Great Khan. They fought a civil war. Kublai won, but the western branches of the empire, the Golden Horde in Russia and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, refused to recognize his authority. The empire fractured into 4 major parts: the Yuan dynasty in China, under Kublai Khan, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Golden Horde in Russia, Eastern Europe, and the Ilkhanate in Persia and the Middle East under Hulagu and his descendants. They were still technically all part of the Mongol Empire. They still acknowledged a vague shared heritage, but in practice, they were independent kingdoms that often fought each other. The unity that Genghis Khan had forged through sheer force of will and personality was gone. It had lasted about 50 years, which, honestly, given the scale of the thing, was pretty impressive. Let's wind down now. Let's let the conquests and the political drama fade into something softer, something more reflective. Because the story of the Mongol Empire doesn't end with its fracturing. In many ways, it is still going. Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, became perhaps the most famous of his successors. Partly because of Marco Polo, Kublai conquered the Song dynasty and reunified China under the Yuan dynasty. He moved the capital to what is now Beijing. He was a sophisticated ruler who patronized the arts, promoted trade, and tried to bridge the gap between his Mongol heritage and the Chinese neighbor civilization he now governed. He wasn't always successful. The ethnic Chinese never fully accepted Mongol rule, and the Yuan dynasty was plagued by internal tensions. But under Kublai, the Mongol Empire, or at least the eastern chunk of it, reached its greatest extent and cultural influence. Kublai also attempted some conquests that didn't go so well. He tried to invade Japan twice. Both times his fleets were destroyed by typhoons. The Japanese called these storms kamikaze, divine wind, and credited their survival to divine intervention. Kublai also tried to invade Vietnam and Java, with mixed results. The Mongol cavalry, so devastating on the open steppe, was significantly less effective in tropical jungles. Who could have predicted that heavily armored horsemen wouldn't perform well in swamps and rainforests? Everyone could have predicted that. The Golden Horde under Batu Khan and his successors dominated Russia for roughly 240 years. This period is known in Russian historiography as the Tatar yoke, and it left a deep imprint on Russian culture and politics. The Russian princes became vassals of the Mongols, traveling to the horde's capital to receive their authority and paying heavy tribute. Some historians have argued that Russia's tradition of autocratic government, the centralized, top-down power structure that runs from the Tsars through Stalin to the present day, was partly shaped by the Mongol model of governance. Whether this is true or an oversimplification is debated, but there is no question that the Mongol period fundamentally shaped Russian history. The Ilkhanate in Persia oversaw a period of cultural exchange between East and West. The Persian artists learned Chinese techniques. Chinese astronomers studied Islamic mathematics. Didn't have strong cultural traditions of their own in these areas. Acted as conduits, connecting civilizations that had previously had limited contact. The Ilkhans eventually converted to Islam. The Ilkhanate became an important part of the Islamic world before it collapsed in the 1330s. The Chagatai Khanate had the most turbulent history of the four successor states. It was constantly splitting, reuniting, and splitting again. But it did produce one more great conqueror, Timur, also Briste, known as Tamerlane, who claimed descent from Genghis Khan through marriage, and launched his own series of devastating conquests in the late 1300s. Timur saw himself as the inheritor of the Mongol legacy, and he tried to recreate the empire through the same combination of brilliant military strategy and shocking violence. He didn't quite manage it, but he came close. And then there is the broader legacy. The Mongol Empire, for all its violence, connected the world. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, was a period of relative stability across Eurasia, allowed trade to flourish on an unprecedented scale. Goods, ideas, technologies, and yes, diseases moved freely across the continent. Silk, spices, porcelain, and gunpowder flowed from east to west. Gold, silver, horses, and religious missionaries flowed from west to east. The printing press, the compass, and paper money all spread partly through Mongol channels. And the diseases. We have to mention the diseases. The same trade networks that carried silk and spices also carried plague. The Black Death, which killed perhaps a third of Europe's population, the mid-1300s, is believed to have travelled west along the Mongol trade routes. The bacterium Yersinia pestis originated in Central Asia and was carried by fleas on rats that hitched rides on rats, merchant caravans. Some historians have even suggested that the Mongols deliberately catapulted plague, infected corpses over the walls of the Crimean city of Kaffa in 1346, driving Genoese merchants to flee by ship to Italy where they spread the disease across Europe. If true, it was one of the first instances of biological warfare, and it killed more people than all the Mongol conquests combined. The Mongol Empire also changed the way Europeans thought about the world. Before the Mongols, Europe was largely inward-looking. The Muslim world blocked the eastern horizon. But the Mongol conquests opened a window. European missionaries and merchants traveled to Mongolia and China. Marco Polo's famous account of his travels in Kublai Khan's court, whether entirely accurate or not, fired their European imagination. It told Europeans that there were vast, wealthy civilizations to the east, beyond the Muslim lands, and that it might be possible to reach them. This curiosity, this hunger for the East, would eventually drive the age of exploration. Columbus, when he set sail in 1492, was trying to find a sea route to the lands that Marco Polo had described. He was trying to get to the described Mongol Empire, or what was left of it. He found the Americas instead, which was not at all what he was looking for. But that is how history works sometimes. So, in a very real sense, the Mongol Empire's legacy includes the European colonization of the Americas, the globalization of trade, the spread of the Black Death, the political shape of modern Russia, the unification of China, and the cultural exchange that laid the groundwork for the modern world. No, bad for a boy who was born clutching a blood clot in a felt tent on the steppe. Let's let it rest there. Let the story settle. Close your eyes if they aren't closed already. Think about the steppe. Think about the grass, stretching in every direction, under a sky so big it makes you feel like a speck. Think about the wind which never stops. Think about a boy named Temüjin, riding a small horse across that endless landscape, carrying nothing but a grudge and a dream so audacious that no reasonable person would ever have believed it could come true. And yet it did. It did. The Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in human history, built by a man who had every reason to fail and no reason to succeed, except that he refused, absolutely, stubbornly, ferociously refused, to be anything less than the greatest conqueror the world has ever known. And now, my friend, that is where we'll leave it. The horses are resting. The fires are dying. The steppe is dark and quiet and cold. And somewhere under the grass, in a place that nobody has ever found and nobody ever will, Genghis Khan is sleeping. And so, I hope, are you. Good night.